Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror in film, television, literature, and popular culture. Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Bruce Markison. As always, I'm joined by trusty co-host and producer Tracy Asteria. Tracy, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Bruce. How's everything going with you today?
Good. How's the world of horror? Anything that's grabbed your attention of late?
Yes, and I'm so excited.
What's that?
There was written confirmation that Mike Flanagan himself, he is definitely going into the Exorcist world. So I couldn't be more thrilled. I was kind of waiting for his personal confirmation, and it's on his website, like on his Facebook pages. So I am so thrilled about that. So
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, I know you saw the first Exorcist follow-up, if you will, and weren't really impressed by it. A lot of people were not. So the expectation will probably increase now that Flanagan is in charge. So he's committed to a second movie. Will there also be a third, do you know?
Yes, he looks like he's in it for the long run. So there's definitely two coming, and fingers crossed if the stories are there, which I'm sure they will be. He'll do more. I think he's the perfect candidate for this new series. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely good news. We've both been impressed with a lot of his work, both the series and films as well. So good to hear that Mike Flanagan will be involved with The Exorcist as that franchise continues. Very good, Tracy. Well, this week, our guest is someone we have not yet talked to, but I think someone you're going to find very interesting. His name is Kirk Hazen. Kirk is a musical composer who has worked on several horror films, including The Traveler and a film called Biophage. He's also a general expert on the horror genre, often comments on our Ghostly Gallery Facebook page, and really always makes insightful, in-depth remarks about films, both past and present. So we wanted to have Kirk on the show before too much time had elapsed. Kirk Hazen, welcome to the Ghostly Gallery. How are you?
I'm excellent, guys. Thank you so much for having me on.
So I kind of discovered you through our Facebook page, but you have an association with horror that goes well beyond that. Let's begin, Kirk, by talking about your work as a composer on films. You have an IMDb page. So you have scored a number of films, and I assume that's something you're going to continue to do in the future. How exactly did this start for you, doing compositions for horror?
Well, I've always been into horror films. I think if you grow up in the Western Pennsylvania area, it's sort of baked into you. If you're not into sports, you're probably into the horror genre because there's such a history of it. And also, big music fan as well, and I started playing guitar in my teens and dabbling in keyboards. So when I was at Edinburgh University studying film, basically we had to do short film thesis films on 16 millimeter, which was a challenge, especially when you're going from 16 and then suddenly going to digital within a year. I got to do the old school stuff, and it meant doing everything yourself. And I scored my own black and white horror film. And I just did it with a little Casio keyboard. And I found that I really enjoyed that. I've always been a fan of John Carpenter soundtracks and Goblin, things like Suspiria and stuff like that. I found it very effective. I could get what I want across idea-wise pretty easily with music. So once I did that, I just did any successive project I did. I always tried to work in the musical realm. And while I was working at Borders Books and Music in Pittsburgh in the mid-2000s, I had heard about a filmmaker named Mark Rapp who was doing a zombie film called Biophage. And I read a local interview in the paper about the film, and he had mentioned The Omega Man with Charlton Heston being a huge influence. And I just love that movie. So I'm like, wow, this sounds pretty cool. And then strangely, I knew a guy who knew him, and we put us in contact with each other. And so I just started hanging out with him, and we started spotting the film. And I realized, this black and white little low budget zombie movie, I know I can do something for this. I felt the right vibe in working with him. So he gave me total complete freedom, which was really nice. If he didn't like something, he would say so, but in general, he got what I was going for. And we used all analog instruments. It was before digital really kicked in. I used a little analog 4-track with a cassette tape, and it's got a very low budget vibe, but I'm really proud of it because it feels organic. It feels like it's part of the film. And yeah, it turned out that we had a pretty great friendship over the years, and we've worked on several projects, on the side on, local films that have come through and things like that, while we're still trying to get our project started as well, both writing and directing. But it was a great experience. And then after that, I did several other films because of that. It put me in contact with other local filmmakers.
What is this black and white film called?
The original one that I did in college was called Darkfall, and it was very Twilight Zone influenced. The sun goes down and never comes back up, and the world's plunged into darkness, that type of thing. And I had to work in black and white because that was our parameters at the time. I really liked it, though. It was very noirish. I was able to really capitalize on the darkness in the story because of the absence of the sun in the story. And then Mark's film Biophage is black and white as well. That was shot on 16 millimeter.
Are there any composers that have inspired you or that you particularly admire in the industry?
Oh, well, for me, the big one, one of the reasons I do film music and one of the reasons I love films is John Carpenter. A lot of his early soundtracks, especially, to me, he has a connection to his material and his films. He just knows what is needed, and knows how to lay down an ambience and atmosphere along with grabbing your ear with signature melodies so well. And, Halloween was a big one. The Fog and Escape from New York are two particular favorites. Just the synthesizer sounds and the mood he is able to establish. And then, one of my other favorite soundtracks in a singular film would be Don Coscarelli's Shockwaves. Fred Myrow and Malcolm Seagrave, their score, I think, is just a masterpiece. It's up there with Goblin or anything else, in the genre. It's almost like horror rock prog or something. It's amazing. And then, obviously John Williams and the more orchestral guys, Ennio Morricone, John Barry. I love his James Bond soundtracks. They're just majestic. But the orchestral stuff, less so, just because that's not really my wheelhouse. I'm definitely a synth guy, and and it can be obnoxious synth or it can be subtle, but that's sort of where I lie, and acoustic guitars and things like that. But yeah, Carpenter is probably the biggest by far.
Oh my goodness! If you could write the music score for any kind of a genre, what would it be for you? Would it be horror? Or would you choose action? Or
definitely horror. I'm a fan of some action scores. Like Escape has an action score while being very moody and spooky. Escape from New York, but to me, horror is where I know I would excel. And I usually know what's needed in that type of situation. Your slow build-ups, your stingers, even though they can be overused. I tend to like horror soundtracks that have a melody to them, but nothing too overwhelming. So things like The Fog and Phantasm, where it's kind of hypnotic and doesn't get in the way. And I have a film that I'd like. It's a screenplay that I've been writing for a number of years now. That is a vampire genre film. That's the one I'm really excited about scoring. I have the score already written. The screenplay isn't finished, but the score is written, in a demo form, because that's when I had the idea. The first thing I thought of was the music, and that's the way things grab me. That's kind of the way John Carpenter works. Sometimes, is the music will hit him first, or even after he's finished the edit of the film. So I'm excited about eventually getting that done, or even just doing the soundtrack and releasing my screenplay as a book, something like that.
Kirk, this is an area that's interesting to me. I don't know a lot about music other than what I like and what I don't like. So I don't necessarily know why I like certain songs and maybe don't find myself attracted to other songs. So I'm curious about this. Can the music make a horror film? And conversely, can it ruin a film?
Oh, yeah, both. I've seen it happen in both cases, small films and large. I think maybe more so than any other genre. Like, for example, comedy, you can have a light touch with its score. It doesn't necessarily need something muscular or intense to drive it. But a horror film, to me, the best of them rely on mood and atmosphere, and half of it's the music and the sound. I really, personally, like I love great cinematography, and that's one of my other favorite aspects of the genre. But yeah, music, if you have a score that's too busy, or maybe you're in the wrong key, even, it can be something subtle, it can scuttle the emotional effect. For me, like, horror movies work better with minor keys. I think that's pretty an obvious thing. And in certain scale modes, like Phrygian, for example, which is a Middle Eastern classical sounding scale, yeah, I think, trying to think of an example, Suspiria kind of has that feeling. That main arpeggio is very much in a minor key, and as is Phantasm and so many other great horror films. Yeah, I really do think it can make or break the mood.
What about a horror film that has almost no music?
I'm trying to think of one I've seen recently that doesn't, and I just watched with my family a movie. Oh yeah, well, there's one that isn't necessarily a horror film, but it works with no music because everything else is so perfect about it, and that's No Country for Old Men. There's only a little bit of music in the film, I think maybe near the end. Otherwise, it's just the sound of the wind and the milieu, the atmosphere of the film. And I'm trying to think, I think Midsummer, Ari Aster's Midsummer, didn't have a ton of music in it. And it's still, I think the only music actually in it, for the most part, was the sound, the villagers' songs, and that particular setting.
Right.
But yeah, I don't seem to recall any score standing out in that. I may be wrong, though. It's been a couple of years since I've seen it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think the original Dracula from 1931, there's not a lot of music in that. Of course, that's early sound era, so they were still kind of learning what they were working with. And I want to say that The Birds, the Hitchcock film, the classic from '63, that doesn't have much music either, as I recall. And of course,
yes.
Well, they're great in different ways, those two movies.
Yeah. Yeah, you reminded me of The Birds. I just watched that with my kids last fall, and it was on the tip of my tongue. What other movie? And yeah, it's just the sound of the birds and the sound of Bodega Bay and the wind off the ocean, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, and it works. The first few times I watched The Birds, I didn't even realize there wasn't much music going on in the background. You don't really miss it because, as you say, they kind of use the sounds of the birds, the sounds of nature, sort of a natural soundscape, if you will. It's a fascinating area, and it's one that I hope to learn a lot more from and learn a lot more about, and you're certainly helpful in that area. Kirk, for you, it seems that your interest in horror really encompasses many of the films, kind of starting with the early 70s all the way up to the current day. You had mentioned to me that a key turning point for you was this vampire wave of films in the early 1970s. Specifically, what are some of the films, some of these vampire films that really interest you from this time period?
Oh, there's so many, but the big the film that I think is responsible for that entire subgenre, especially the modernization of the modern vampire film, is Count Yorga from 1970. That movie was a surprise hit for AIP. It suddenly made Robert Corey a bankable star after years of being in Perry Mason episodes and things like that in the 50s and 60s. Setting a Dracula-esque Transylvania, or Bulgarian in his case, count in a modern setting was somewhat novel at the time. I think a few films prior did it. And I think the original Dracula, it's sort of contemporary to 1931, I think, right? He arrives in London at that time frame. But other than that, there hadn't been any films either that had dealt with the counterculture or anything from the 60s. And Count Yorga did all of that in 1970. He had contemporary adults doing their thing and then dealing with almost amusedly, like, oh, this guy's a count, and thinking he's kind of funny and not taking him seriously. And of course they do when things get intense. And that movie and its sequel, The Return of Count Yorga, which I think is even a better film, they kind of started that, cemented that. It also helped, I think, to have, in 1972, what is it? Trying to think. It's Night Stalker. That's it. Kolchak the Night Stalker.
Yes. Yeah.
That came out and blew people's minds. I had a couple of older relatives that remember it quite well when it hit TV and how much of a hit it was. And that was another contemporary vampire, Janis Skorzeny, I think was his name. And it was fun, I think, for audiences back then to finally see, Count Dracula come from the Hammer period pieces into contemporary modern life. The other big Robert Corey film I'm a huge fan of, and I think it handles the counterculture stuff especially well, if not amusingly, is 1972's The Death Master, where he basically plays a Yorga-style count named Korda, and he's become a hippie guru, and he has all these hippies surrounding him in this mansion, and basically, speaks to them about everlasting life, which means he's going to make them live forever and drink their blood. And that movie, it's fun in a kind of almost slightly silly way, but he is scary. And that's a film that made a huge impression on me as a kid, along with the other two. I think The Death Master is highly underrated. And Corey, there's something about his style of acting and the intensity in his eyes. And he had a theatrical bent as well, and he was able to really grab your attention as those characters. But I wish AIP hadn't screwed him out of his contract, because he was, being posed to be the next Vincent Price. And then I think after Madhouse, he got cut when AIP started having financial issues. Really? Because I think his career could have leveled up. And those Yorga films are responsible for a lot of the same similar films with similar energy. Like Blackula was highly influenced by the Yorga films. And to the point where they got Bob Keljan, the director of the first Yorga, to do the second Blackula film. Right. It always seems like the second movies are my favorites, two out of those. Scream, Blackula, Scream is terrific, and I love Pam Grier. She's in that.
Let's go back to Count Yorga for a moment. I think it's kind of an underrated film. I love it. A lot of people don't necessarily remember it or talk about it. Corey did a great job. He was very dignified, sophisticated. Here he is, this kind of old world, somewhat of a charmer hiding behind this vampire persona. He meets up with these young people, and, at first he's kind of, I don't want to say gregarious with them, but he's outgoing, he's willing to talk. And then slowly but surely we start to see the sinister side of him. And there's a great scene where, I can't remember the name of the actor, but he's the main protagonist in the movie. And he realizes that Yorga is a vampire, and it's very late. It's like 4:30 in the morning. The sun is about to rise. And he's trying to stall Count Yorga. He's trying to keep him talking in the living room so that the sun comes out and destroys him. And Corey kind of realizes this, and they're sort of going back and forth, kind of toying with each other. I think it's a great scene, and it really shows the kind of acting that Corey was capable of doing.
I could not agree with you more. That's the key scene in that film, I think. Roger Perry, I think, was the hero. And he was also a different character, but he was cast in the second Count Yorga as well with facial hair. Roger Perry, great actor. I remember him in a Star Trek a couple years prior. That scene is fantastic. The tension builds. It's kind of humorous. Literally, Count Yorga asks for the giant steak, and holds it and looks at it and hands it back. There's a lot of that tension. And then you finally get to the point where I think he says something like he doesn't want to be distasteful, but, you must leave, gentlemen. And then there's that moment where, Roger Perry says, what about vampires? And Corey turns to him and just glares. And, perhaps you will find out, or something like that. Very, very menacing, because you're right. He comes off very charming until our heroes almost obnoxiously kind of start pushing him. They show up at his house late at night and, this wine's really great. Can I have another glass? That type of, you have an unwanted breakfast.
Yeah.
And he had very good reasons for going to bed at 5 or 6 a.m. Yeah, that's fantastic scene.
Yeah. I didn't realize that he had this dispute with AIP. And you wonder if that didn't happen, might he have become the 1970s version of Bela Lugosi? I mean, I thought he was a very good actor.
I think so too. I think he could have been the next Christopher Lee, at least. And I often think of him. I compare him and Lee's Dracula a lot because Corey gets more lines than Christopher Lee had, and yet there's that sense of feralness when Robert Corey changes into a vampire, and the Deathmaster is the same thing.
Yeah.
White face, fangs, and that stinger of music, and the it's really, really effective. And I think one of the reasons why Corey had problems with AIP is Sam Arkoff, who is like the head chairman of AIP. He was angry that Robert Corey went and made the Deathmaster on his own. Corey actually produced that film. He got, I think it was Bill Marks to score it, and Bill Marks had scored the Yorga films. He got Michael Butler to do the cinematography. Michael Butler later went on to do Jaws, but Butler was doing low-budget films at the time, and he did The Return of Count Yorga and The Deathmaster back-to-back. Beautifully shot. And I think what happened is Arkoff got angry at him and basically said, well, I won't sue you, but give me The Deathmaster and I'll distribute it. And they did distribute it, but Corey said that Arkoff basically buried the film. And, on second bills, and didn't want him, he wanted to own it and take it away from Corey, and Corey not to make any money from it, sadly. And it's a shame because it did make its rounds at drive-ins, but it disappeared pretty quickly and showed up on television when I was a kid, and that's when I saw it. It deserves more attention, and it probably would have been considered the third Yorga film, if there wasn't that dispute.
Yeah. One last question on the original Count Yorga. The other scene I really like is when they're in the basement / dungeon of his house, and he's got the three brides down there, and he's confronting the Roger Perry character, and he gives him that maniacal laugh. I love that.
Yeah. I've actually done versions of that for my kids because they're familiar with those films. My daughter especially loves the Count Yorga films.
Yeah.
It's kind of that mocking, like, like that. And he keeps just, Michael, he keeps taunting him because he's calling for his friend Michael. It's really vicious and kind of funny too. There's something, you have a sneaking admiration for Yorga in a way, even though he is pretty rotten. And the second one going after children, in an orphanage. There's a sense of, I don't know, you've survived a long time, and if people just stay out of your way and leave you alone, but anytime you start messing with him, he comes after you.
Another great actor was William Marshall as Blackula. You mentioned him. We've had the guy known as Toothpickings, Brian Forrest, on the show. He's a huge fan of the Blackula series, especially the first one. You indicated you like the second one, Scream Blackula, Scream, a little bit better.
Yes.
But Marshall is great in a very different way than Robert Corey, and really did his best, I think, to kind of elevate the material of those films, those two movies.
Yeah, much like Corey did. I think Corey played him with his vampire with a bit more humor. Marshall played it pretty straight and let the humor happen around him. He was the prince, the African prince vampire, and it gave it even more of a Shakespearean feel. He's fantastic in that. And I love the backstory too. It's a great opening in the original Blackula, showing him meet Dracula and how Dracula betrays him. It's kind of haunting, to spend all that time in a crypt being alive, And I do love the interactions when he gets out and having to deal with contemporary world. It's really fascinating.
Another movie that you indicated you liked, Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter. I like it too. That's a good one.
Oh yeah. It's a lot of fun. I think it's Hammer. They seem to be attempting to establish a franchise that unfortunately never happened. Brian Clemens, who wrote and directed that, he had done some work for Hammer before, but it was his, I think at the time, his idea of, well, let's establish a character instead of Van Helsing. Let's make a superhero in a way. And I'd say the only thing that I wish it had more of is a bit more graphic violence, maybe a bit more vampire. I don't even want to criticize it because it's so good, but I remember when I saw it as a kid, I was amused by it, but I didn't connect with it as much because I kind of wanted to see more of the intensity of the Hammer 70s vampire stuff like Twins of Evil and Vampire Circus, which are two of my favorites of Hammers in the early 70s. But Kronos has really grown on me over the years. And I love, like his friend who he becomes a vampire. That whole subplot is great. There's that scene in the bar that's like a Western.
Yeah.
The local thugs try to mess with them. I just love moments like that. It's taking the elements of other films and creating kind of a unique synthesis. The music in that movie is really great too. It's got that kind of stirring, slightly upbeat hero theme. And I heard there had been talk of sequels over the years, even some contemporary filmmakers resurrecting Captain Kronos. And I'd love to see that. It could be really neat, Netflix series, do 6 or 7 episodes of a period piece of that character.
Yeah.
Because as cool as Van Helsing is, there's something swashbuckling about Captain Kronos and his singular focus on going from countryside to countryside, eliminating the undead.
Yeah. You mentioned that scene in the bar. That's a great confrontation between Kronos, played by Horst Janssen, and a great British actor who was specialized in playing tough guys, Ian Hendry.
Yeah,
boy, he puts Ian Hendry in his place like nobody else could have.
Yeah, Hendry. Yeah, he usually wasn't at a disadvantage as much. Usually he's the bad guy. Although Theater of Blood, I think he's one of the victims in that, or maybe a policeman. And I remember him in Get Carter with Michael Caine, where Michael Caine totally intimidates him and tells him he has eyes like piss holes in the snow. Famous line in that film. Yeah, Hendry, as soon as he showed up in the film, and I watched it again recently, I'm like, oh my God, yeah, that's that guy. And yeah, it's a great little moment, and it does remind me of a classic gunslinger entering a bar, and having to face down the local fools or tough guys.
Yeah. Well, like you, I love all of these movies, all these vampire movies from the early 1970s. And in some ways, I'd love to see them remade today with bigger budgets. I guess they'd have to be more blood and gore because tastes have changed and they want to cater to a younger market. You mentioned the possibility of maybe doing a remake or maybe a series of the Captain Kronos film. What about doing another Blackula, doing another Count Yorga? Is it feasible, or are we just wishing at this point?
I'd love to see another Count Yorga. Although I think Blackula would probably have more marketability. It's more well known amongst fans of horror and blaxploitation. And I could see, like Jamie Foxx has a Netflix deal. I could see him doing Blackula, and playing the main character and things like that. Although, frankly, I'd rather see Sam Jackson maybe do it because I think he could pull off the slightly older, more dignified vampire. But I think that would be the main one. And then, there's so many other films, vampire films of that era. They're not as well known and may not have a in terms of public knowledge of them, like Hannah, Queen of the Vampires, with Andrew Prine. That I think that would make a terrific remake because its setting is a small island in the middle of the Mediterranean, and there's a female vampire in that one that's everybody's afraid of. And then Night of the Devils, which is an Italian film, and that one I think most of all would make a great remake because it deals with a family in the middle of nowhere that have to deal with the Vertilac, which is sort of like the European vampire. And that one stuck in my head because it's, you have an outsider visiting the village and discovering what's going on here and not quite believing it, and then falling in love with the daughter of the patriarch of the clan. And it's a really, I don't know if you guys have never seen it. I highly recommend it. It's very moody and atmospheric while still being harrowingly gruesome at times, especially in the second half. That's the one I probably personally remake out of all of them. Although honestly, like if somebody handed me Count Yorga as a property, I'd probably grab that just because of it's closer to my heart. And it'd be great to get somebody, somewhere in their 30s and 40s, maybe early 50s to play Yorga. I can't imagine who,
Yeah.
because Quarry's just those eyes and that delivery, and he was singular as an actor.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, those two films you mentioned, I have not seen either of them. The first one, what was it, Hannah, Queen of the Vampires?
Yeah, also known as Crypt of the Living Dead, and that came out, I think it was 1972 or three, and it shows up on streaming occasionally.
Okay. So that's a good one. And the other one is Night of the Devils?
Yeah, Night of the Devils. It does. That one has a Blu-ray release from, I think, Kino Lorber, maybe, or one of those companies, and maybe out of print. I did see Night of the Devils pop up on Shudder a couple years ago.
Okay.
But it's well worth checking out, and it's got that European feel, kind of like the Paul Naschy films, without any werewolves or anything like that. But yeah, it's really recommended.
Very good. I've learned something there. I'm going to add those two to my growing list here. One of the things, Kirk, you also mentioned to me before we actually sat down to do this interview, you talked about what you call the Canadian golden age of horror exploitation, really from the mid 70s to the mid 80s. Explain exactly what you mean by that.
Oh, that's one where it almost deserves an entire episode on its own. But
Okay.
to sum it up, in the mid 70s, the Canadian government basically created a tax shelter type of situation, where I think they would cover, if you invested in a film, they would cover like 100% of those costs as a tax write-off, if I'm getting those financials correct. And I think one of the first movies that got caught up in that was Bob Clark's Black Christmas. Because it's at the beginning of any of these Canadian films, it would always say like film funding, and that has that on the title. And you could bring in an American actor or American crew, but you basically had to hire mostly Canadians to do it. And Black Christmas has John Saxon, of course, and Olivia Hussey, I think, is British, but most of it was Canadian talent. And then Bob Clark being the American director. And after that, the other filmmaker to really capitalize on that was David Cronenberg. I think starting with Shivers and Rabid, The Brood, all the way through, I think, to Scanners, because that was co-produced by Canadian government and Avco Embassy. And then once he hit The Dead Zone and some of those bigger studio films, then he was in America, taking American funding. But it's amazing how many genre films over the years were part of this tax shelter. Like My Bloody Valentine was a big example. The Prom Night, Terror Train, a lot of those early 80s slashers, Happy Birthday to Me. It was a real fertile time in Canada because you could just get your movie set up so much easier when you had that funding up front. You knew the government was going to help you subsidize. And a lot of them are, at the time, I think in Canada, there was consternation because all these films here are horror films, but now they're considered classics, including a movie that I just discovered last year called Siege from 1982. It just got a Blu-ray release, but it's like kind of a remake of Assault on Precinct 13. It was shot in Nova Scotia and Halifax. And that was another example of just one of these great under-the-radar films. And companies like Avco Embassy would pick up these Canadian films and distribute them in America. And a lot of times, Canadian filmmakers would make it seem like they were American films. Prom Night's supposed to take place at an American high school. My Bloody Valentine is supposed to be a Midwest town. I remember hearing that thinking, wait, they're on the coast of Nova Scotia. There's an ocean there. Well, whatever works, It's a really fascinating time in movie history. And I think the movies were very unique. Another one from 1977 is Rituals, starring Hal Holbrook and Lawrence Dane. And that one was shot up in the North Woods of Canada, deep in the forest. And Hal Holbrook was the big American name, but everybody else in the film was Canadian. And I think Lawrence Dane helped produce it too. I love that. It's probably even beyond Deliverance. It's one of my favorite backwoods drama horror films.
I just watched that last year, and I was surprised how good it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been watching. I remember seeing that as a teenager. I was probably 12 or 13. It was on TV. And I knew Hal Holbrook from, Magnum Force and The Fog and Creepshow. And so I'm like, oh, this guy, he's pretty cool. And then it really took me on a journey. It was one of the those movies. I hadn't seen Deliverance yet, and that was definitely being an introduction to being a grown up, seeing that film. And with horrible things that can happen to you. But Rituals was one of those ones where it didn't matter that I wasn't a doctor or didn't understand their particular subculture that these guys on vacation dealt with. It was just fascinating to me that the survival aspects and the fact that it didn't go too far. It didn't try to get into crazy heroics. Very, very realistic depiction of what it would be like to deal with an unfriendly force in the wood.
So was there a Canadian version to Hollywood, or were these films spread out in all different kinds of locations?
I think Toronto definitely was the hub, no doubt. A lot of the actors came from Toronto. Some of the films like Black Christmas shot in Toronto, and even if they shot in Vancouver or Nova Scotia or Quebec, they were still tend to have the hub. A lot of the agents and a lot of the talent seem to use Toronto as their hub.
Tracy, being from Canada, did you know about this?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I didn't really know a lot about like the horror aspect, but there's like the huge boom with the Vancouver side of like movies and TV series. And it's been like that for years. Even here in Nova Scotia, I mean, we've had like a Stephen King series, and I want to say there's like a really popular one. It might be From, I think, the From TV series. I think it was shot in Nova Scotia.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, oh my goodness, countless Hallmark Christmas movies. Like Nova Scotia offers a huge like government incentive for filming here. And it's like that across different parts of Canada too. So the industry is huge and it's increasing, and Canada has so much talent, like both in front of the camera and behind the camera. And it's an ongoing thing. So it's just huge. We have, so much talent, and there's lots of sci-fi, there's major motion pictures, there's, you name it, we have it here. It's amazing, actually.
It is. I'm such a fan. And so many great Canadian actors and comedians have come to America in the ensuing years. And you're right. Not Toronto, but Vancouver. Vancouver has become probably the main hub nowadays. In the old days, in the 70s and 80s, it was Toronto. But since I think the X-Files started shooting in Vancouver in the 90s, I think that really cemented that, because they shot the entire length of the series. It was based out of there.
That's right. So much like, I mean, the X-Files, and then, Stargate, like all three of the franchise, Battlestar, like it was all there. It was wonderful.
Sure is.
One of my favorite TV series, not a horror series, but it's very well done, is Monk, which is on in syndication now. And I believe that's pretty much done in Vancouver. That's another one. And they have great backdrops, and it kind of looks like San Francisco, which is where it's supposed to be set in, but it's done in Canada. And I didn't realize that there had been all these horror films back late 70s, early 80s that came from Canada. For some reason, I just didn't know about it.
Yeah, it's
on me.
Definitely a good subgenre or in terms of a country's output to get into it. It's if you start with I'm assuming you've seen Black Christmas, that's probably the first, but the early Cronenberg, they're very, and I prefer that the early Cronenberg films are very Canadian in their vibe. Rabbit in particular, just the Canadian countryside, and a lot of these films seem to be shot usually in the fall or winter, so there's a certain atmosphere and vibe that I really, really like. But I'm definitely a cold weather guy. I'm not, so I guess I identified with that as a kid. There was another Canadian-U.S. production in the mid-'70s, Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane, which was shot up in Canada, I think Montreal area, and Jodie Foster and Martin Sheen were in that. But the rest of the cast, they're all Canadians. And it's tremendously atmospheric. It's a great little Hitchcockian thriller. Right.
Well, we're on the subject of Cronenberg. You mentioned some of the movies, The Brood, Scanners, later did Videodrome, The Fly. Of all the Cronenberg films, do you have a favorite, Kirk?
It kind of it's like Carpenter. I always go with the first 5 movies roughly, but with Cronenberg, gosh, I always loved Scanners when I was a kid, and I still have a lot of affection for that because it's Cronenberg marrying body horror with action. And you have Michael Ironside, who I just love. That was one of his first big movies that brought him to public consciousness. But I'd have to say overall these days, I probably have to go back to Rabid after seeing that this winter and just being how impressed with the movie for a low budget, what he got out of that. And then Marilyn Chambers is really good in that film. Like, it's really interesting to see what a good actress she was beyond her previous career or concurrent career at the time. Yeah, I think that one might be at the moment my favorite. And then emotionally, I think The Dead Zone. I think that's just a really great, deep, heavy film with lots of great subtext and even really on the nose political commentary, which I think is important. I watched that with my kids last year. And at one point, my daughter the Greg Stilson, Martin Sheen character. She just remarked, like, he's scary. He kind of reminds me of some crazy people in politics these days. And I'm like, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, even back then.
Yeah.
Who do you want lingering over the button? That movie went over well, and it still chokes you up too. It's a great flick.
I agree. It's my favorite Cronenberg movie. It's not one of the body horror films. It's very different.
Yeah.
But I think it's one of the best one of the best adaptations of a Stephen King film. And it really shows Christopher Walken more than just villain. I mean, he could play a very sincere, well-meaning protagonist who is faced with a very difficult decision at the end of the film and ends up doing something controversial for the greater good. I thought Walken just nailed that role.
I could not agree with you more. He's subtle. There's none of his affectations he has later, which I love. Yeah, I love the later Walken and True Romance and the SNL skit with the cowbell. All that stuff is great, and he's so singular in his style. But in The Dead Zone, he really plays that perfectly, and so it's so sad, and you really get a sense of the character's grief. And he's a man out of time. He's lost all those years with Brooke Adams. All of that is just so rich and powerful, and he does it perfectly.
All right, Kirk, let's get to your favorite director, John Carpenter. What's the best Carpenter film that no one talks about?
Oh, wow. It used to be for me The Fog, but in recent years, I think younger generations are discovering it, and its stock has gone up. And even Assault Precinct 13, a lot of his films that are considered lesser, like Halloween and The Thing and Escape from New York, even Big Trouble in Little China, seem to be talked about over the years a great deal. I'd say out of all of them, I go back to his original film Dark Star in 1974, the one he did with Dan O'Bannon. It's a collaboration with O'Bannon, so it isn't as much 100% Carpenter like Assault Precinct 13 would be a couple years later. But Dark Star still, to this day, it's such a unique little film. The philosophy behind it, the humor, what they managed to accomplish as college students. It's just a great film. And I a lot of times, for me, a barometer of how a film works and how it works for me later in life is when I watch it with my kids and their reaction. And I thought, they've seen 2001, that they'll probably be bored with this. And they loved it. They especially that ending. Have you guys ever seen it?
I have not, no.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it, but it's such a funny and touching ending. It makes you feel good, and it's also got a bit of melancholy. And they laughed, and at the same time they're like, and when a movie can affect you that way, and it was just college kids, O'Bannon and Carpenter working on this film for 5 years. So yeah, I'd say overall that one in particular, but the Assault Precinct 13 isn't talked about as much anymore. And that's another one where I think Carpenter made his most honest, straightforward Western, because he's always loved Westerns and wanted to do them. And Escape from New York is kind of Western meets James Bond. But Assault is a pure Western, where the street gang are the Native American Apaches attacking the fort. the precincts, the fort, all of that. And our characters are the sheriff and then the gunslinger. And yeah, that works tremendously well even to this day.
I have not seen Dark Star either. Is it more horror or sci-fi?
It's more sci-fi. I'd say more of a kind of a lark or a slight spoof on 2001. And those elements, you can tell right away what it's trying to do. But it's also very funny and subtle, the way it moves into a bit of cosmic horror at one point. But it's played for laughs. Dan O'Bannon wrote a subplot about an alien on the ship that they captured in their travels, because they're basically going around the universe, blowing up stars that are about to supernova because they want to colonize space. This is some far off future, 100 years or so. And this crew's trapped out there for 20 years doing that. So in their time, occasionally they'll encounter a life form, but none of it's intelligent. And in this case, it's a beach ball that they painted with feet. Creature from the Black Lagoon claws, literally the same claws. And it's so silly and fun, but it's O'Bannon warming up for Alien. Because in those scenes, Dan O'Bannon, who actually plays this character Pinback, he has to go find the alien. It gets loose in the ship. But so he goes with a broom and tries to get it and swat it back in his cage. It escapes and goes into the ducts. O'Bannon has to find it and has to crawl through an elevator shaft, and all kinds of almost like Looney Tunes style stuff occur, but it's still based very much in kind of a hard sci-fi feel. And I really often felt that, if it wasn't for Dark Star, you probably wouldn't have Alien. And a lot of other people feel that way too. You'll see the influence, but it is essentially a comedy, and there's a lot of kind of sweet, good-natured vibe to it, while still having our characters bickering on the ship. They've been stuck there for 20 years. So there's a lot of humor in that. It's really underrated. Some people have seen it and hated it. And then later on say, I thought about it some more, Kirk. And it's a really cool movie. In fact, Quentin Tarantino, when he was a kid, he saw it in the theater and hated it because it had a bunch of hippies. He was tired of hippies, back then in the mid 70s, they reminded me of my brother's friends, whatever, and he saw it recently, like a year ago, on his Video Archives podcast, and now he calls it a masterpiece. And I'd have to agree to an extent, it is kind of a masterpiece. For all the budget restrictions they had, they pulled off something pretty exceptional.
Putting aside underrated, overrated, low expectation, high expectation, what's your favorite Carpenter film? Is it Halloween or something else?
Oh, it would probably be Halloween or The Fog. But I have this obsession that goes back to when I was in my early teens with Escape from New York. That movie came out, kind of knocked my socks off. I love the Snake Plissken character. I love the mood and atmosphere of the city, the whole idea of the mission he has to go on, the funny kind of dark, laconic humor in the film. And it also, at the time, I was sick as a child, between the ages of about 8 and 13. And spending time in the hospital and dealing with all kinds of tests and things like that, I latched onto the Plissken character as sort of a model of strength and adversity. Well, he put up with all this stuff and made it out in the other end. So I have a real strong connection to that film. And also, I think the soundtrack, I can put that soundtrack on any time and just get lost in the film and then the vibe. It's one of the most influential soundtracks for me. But also, I think it's one of the first, besides Tangerine Dream's score for Thief that year, which I think it came out the same year with James Caan. It's one of the first electronic soundtracks that really, all electronic instruments, and really made an impression, I think, on composers. Because you hear it later in films like The Terminator. Brad Fiddel's score for that film in '84, very, very influenced by Escape from New York. In fact, Cameron was influenced by working on the effects for Escape from New York. He did all of the optical and the matte paintings and everything in that film because they hired New World Films to do the effects. And he was very inspired by Carpenter and wanted to do a low-budget sci-fi film similarly. And he made The Terminator. And, that's one of the greats.
You mentioned The Fog, which I also love. Very atmospheric, kind of an old-fashioned horror movie in a lot of ways. Another movie that I really like from Carpenter, and some people don't, some people say they really hate it, I'm not sure why, but I think it's pretty darn good. Late 1990s, as I recall. John Carpenter's Vampires. What do you think of that one?
I love that movie. I agree with you about The Fog, too. It's probably one of my favorite ghost stories. Yeah, Vampires, I was really excited when that movie came out. I remember being in college and going with my friends to see it. And I finally Carpenter's tackling vampires, because it's definitely, vampires are one of my favorite subgenres. And it didn't disappoint. I think Carpenter seemed to be influenced a little bit by, like, From Dusk Till Dawn. I sensed that a little bit in the Southwest desert setting. And the book he based it on, John Steake's Vampires, I thought was a terrific book. And I had actually read it before I saw the film. And they're kind of different, but he captures the overall feel of it. And it's kind of like he's doing a Sam Peckinpah film with vampires. A lot of sweaty characters, a lot of tension, confrontation between the characters. And I thought Thomas Ian Griffith's Valak was a great classical vampire, and the Yorgo, kind of vibe, really intimidating and cool. And that entire opening scene with where they're partying in the motel room is a real benchmark, in terms of vampire violence. And I remember being pretty blown away by it. And James Woods, he tears into that role like he's never going to act again.
Yeah,
he's great.
You think maybe he is why some people don't like the movie? Because he can be a little bit of a polarizing figure. I love him as an actor, but he can be controversial.
Yeah, I think some people were probably put off by it because he has the most dialogue in the film, and there's a lot. I get the impression Carpenter really wanted to have him be a fun character, so there's a lot of one-liners and things like that, along with some of the deeper character bits that he does. I think he isn't for everybody. I'm a fan. And I love him in Videodrome, but I remember a review of Videodrome back then that talked about him being kind of greasy and pockmarked and not good to look at. And I'm thinking, he's a great character actor. He's not supposed to be Brad Pitt.
Right.
But yeah, I think you're right about that.
Yeah. One final question on John Carpenter. He's getting up there in years. Do you think we'll see any more horror films from him?
I would hope he would at least do one more. I do get the impression he's happier doing music and kind of chilling out, because I think as you get older, directing can be really taxing. Your health ought to be pretty good. You should be able to, handle the long days and the multiple personalities. And I think he's just kind of tired of that, the impression I get in interviews. Personally, I'd love to see him do another film. The one thing I want to see him do the most is, years ago, I read an interview with him where he said he was writing a book about his experiences in Hollywood, starting from the beginning of his career. And he said much of it is finished, but he just hasn't felt like doing all the rewriting and going back into it. And if there's one thing I'd like to see from him besides another film, it's definitely his autobiography. And he would have some amazingly interesting things to say. He's been through the ringer, with studios, and he's on every level. He's experienced about as many ups and downs as you can have in a career, including some ones he's talked about. But there's many that in interviews and commentaries, he'll just mention, Barry Diller, that SOB at 20th Century Fox, who screwed him over on Big Trouble in Little China. I want to hear that story. I want to hear about that. Or when he lost his Universal contract after The Thing didn't perform well, which is so tragic. To me, The Thing is one of his masterpieces and one of the greatest sci-fi horror films ever made. And yet, because the box office that summer was crummy, Universal, in my opinion, Universal lost its chance to work with him. But that was a big blow to Carpenter. And yeah, I'd love to hear all those stories and hear his enthusiasm. One of the things I love about interviews with filmmakers is hearing the stuff they grew up with and what moved them and the films that excited them. And Carpenter, for him, it was a lot of the 50s atomic age horror and Hammer horror of the 60s. And just to get that inside view. Yeah. I'd love to see him do that.
Kirk, I have one more question before I want to turn things over to Tracy for two final questions to wrap things up. You live in the Pennsylvania area, and really since George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, 1968, The Pittsburgh area has become kind of a mini hotbed of horror. We have actors like Tom Atkins. We have, follow-up films to Night of the Living Dead, like Dawn of the Dead, the works of director Bob Clark. Is this attributable to Romero, or is that oversimplifying things when you look at the Pittsburgh area?
I think it is attributable to him. He kind of he opened up the industry here. If it hadn't been for Night of the Living Dead, and then subsequent films, I think Dawn of the Dead really cracked it, because between Night and Dawn, he had trouble getting financing. After that, he became a major filmmaker. But in the 70s, post Night of the Living Dead, locally, there was Season of the Witch, which he shot. Martin, of course, from I think 76. That's another fairly well-known film that he had to do on a shoestring budget because he couldn't get funding. So it took him a while to build up to Dawn. But once he did, I think it created the base of filmmaking here with guys like Tom Savini, all of the art direction guys like Cletus Anderson, actors like John Amplis. They all came from the Pittsburgh area, and even like Laurie Cardill from Day of the Dead, who played Sarah. She's a local Pittsburgher. Her dad was Chili Billy Cardill, who is absolutely one of my influences as a kid. I watched the show all the time, and it really, I'd say Romero and John Russo as well, because John Russo did a lot of low budget productions in the 70s and 80s, and was a writer too. Without them, I don't think it would be what it is these days. And then in the early 90s, I think the other big event that happened was Silence of the Lambs being shot here in Pennsylvania. And there was a lot of people that got their union cards on that movie, and it was a really big deal for PA. Buffalo Bill's house is not far from here, and it became another iconic landmark like the Monroeville Mall or the Evans City Cemetery that people visit. And now I think the film community, it's really solid. A lot of Netflix shows have been done here in recent years, like Mindhunter was one. They did one down the river from us in Brownsville called "I Am Not Okay with This" with Sophie Lillis from the new It films, and that was excellent. They got canceled, unfortunately, because of the pandemic. But there's a lot of activity locally, and I know several people who've worked on union shoots and things and Netflix shoots, and so it's pretty healthy. And even on a low budget level, if you want to shoot something, for $10,000 around here, it's a lot easier than other areas because you do have a homegrown base of talent.
For modern horror, what are a couple of recent films that you've enjoyed?
There's actually several. In recent years, and I guess I'll go back to 2011. The first movie to scare me in probably 2 decades up to that point was Kill List by Ben Wheatley, a British filmmaker. And Kill List is a folk horror, basically, about 2 hitmen who are hired by these shady, creepy people in business suits in a hotel room to kill 3 people. And one of them's, a librarian, and one of them is a minister of parliament. And basically they go on this odyssey and find out as they knock each person off that they're in something very deep and very dangerous. And that one got under my skin. It's got an incredible ending. Still to this day, I get goosebumps on my arm just thinking about it. It really harrowing. And in my opinion, it's probably my favorite modern folk horror film. And in terms of contemporary films, folk horror has had such a resurgence. And another one of my favorite contemporary films is Midsummer. I was pretty blown away by that. Not everybody was, but it definitely grabbed me. The other Ari Aster film, Hereditary.
Oh my gosh!
Which is really Kill List is grim enough. Hereditary takes it to a new level. It's wow, and almost to the point of I don't know how much more I can take of modern horror if it's going to go in that direction. Because I've never seen a Serbian film, and I never will. All I need to do is hear about that film, and I'm out. Yeah, let other people deal with that kind of thing. I'm a little bit more of a traditionalist, but those are 2 big ones. House of the Devil from 2009, I really enjoyed. That was a nice retro. shot on 16, made to look like it came out in 83. I mean, it's like they were making that film for me. It felt like.
Oh my gosh. So are you looking forward to anything that's coming up in the theater over the next year?
God, there's several things. I wanted to see that recent one. I haven't seen it. Abigail sounded cool. That sounded like a lot of fun. I missed that one though, unfortunately. And the Godzilla movies, my son and I love Godzilla films. So we just had our palates satiated with Godzilla minus zero or minus one,
Right.
and the most recent Kong Godzilla. But coming up, there's so many things on the horizon that I've heard announced. I can't actually think of anything concrete, but I know there's just several things that are coming out that look interesting. And I would agree, talking about earlier, Mike Flanagan taking over The Exorcist, because I wasn't real blown away by the Exorcist reboot.
Right.
And I think Flanagan's so talented. To me, Dr. Sleep is a great sequel to The Shining, which I never thought could happen. So I feel confident that the stewardship will be good in his hands, because unfortunately, David Gordon Green, I think he should stay away from horror, because I did not care for the Halloween trilogy he did. The first one in 2018 was okay, but the second two were they were train wrecks and comedies, in my opinion, more than anything. So yeah, Flanagan's Exorcist film probably on the horizon. That would be a big one.
Oh wow, I'm definitely looking forward to that, and the new Nosferatu coming out at Christmas time.
Yeah, that's the one. I was trying to think what is coming out, and Eggers' Nosferatu would be top of the list probably.
Yeah, so looking forward to that one. Oh, that's awesome. So thank you. Those are great movies. I have a whole page of recommendations now. I'll have to add it to my book.
Awesome. Thank you. That's the one thing, during college at Edinburgh, I worked at a video store. It was a big video store in town. And there was something very gratifying about recommending films and having somebody come in and just say it was so great. Black Christmas was my big go-to. If somebody comes in and wanted something scary but not gory, I'm like, this is it. If this doesn't get to you, I don't know what to say. And a lot of times people would come in and tell me they couldn't sleep, afterwards. And I'm like, well, I did my job, And occasionally people would come in and say, oh, it's 270s. I didn't like the way their hair was. Oh, well, if that's going to eliminate a film for you, don't even ask me for recommendations then, because I like to go back.
Yeah, Kirk, you've given us a great list of films here that I have not seen, that Tracy has not seen either. Hannah, Queen of the Vampires, Night of the Devils, Carpenter's Dark Star from 1974, and also Kill List. I've not seen that one from 2011. Oh, yeah. So you've got a good working list here for us. A lot of homework.
Add the Death Master to that too. If you haven't seen Robert Quarry and the Death Master from 1972, check that out. I think if you're a Yorga fan, I think you'll latch onto it. It's really excellent, and I think you can get it on DVD. It may even be on YouTube in parts free, but it's highly, highly recommended.
Very cool.
Very good. Well, Kirk, we really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us over this past hour on the Ghostly Gallery. Phenomenal insights. We love seeing your comments on our Facebook page, and now we've had a chance to put you in the spotlight, and you were great. Really terrific stuff. Very much enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. This was a pleasure to be on here. It's great talking with people who are intelligent and know what they love, and yeah, this has been wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Well, Tracy's the intelligent one, and I know what I love, so I guess it works out in some way. Our guest has been Kirk Hazen. Kirk is, as you can tell, an authority on horror films, particularly from 1970 to the current day, although he also delves into some of the earlier stuff as well. And he is a musical composer, has an IMDb page, has worked on several films, including The Traveler and Biophage, and some other projects coming up as well. So our thanks to our guest, Kirk Hazen. Thanks, of course, to my co-host and producer, Tracy Asteria. We appreciate all of you joining us in this Museum of the Macabre, and we hope we'll see you next time right here in the Ghostly Gallery.